Warning, this show contains adult language and themes. Liberals and little children should cover their ears.
Welcome to Liberty Never Sleeps, where negativity never sounded so good. Now here's your host, Thomas Purcell.
And we're back. Today is the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And this is a particularly important one, not because of the date, but because of what's going on in the world and what we're faced with. During World War II, the beginnings of World War II, we knew Adolf Hitler and Nazism was one of the greatest threats to human freedom that the world has ever seen. We knew this before we were bombed at Pearl Harbor. It's one of the reasons why we supported Europe before we actually went to war. We supplied them with armaments. Men went over, volunteers. They would fight in Foreign Legion type units to fight Nazism, to fight the scourge of what Nazism meant. Today, we are faced with a very similar threat. An ideology that's extreme, that seeks the extermination of one or more peoples, that is injurious to both the world's economy and the people that live in it. And yet somehow the United States and most of the world, the same people that fought off Nazism, that banded together in a unified front to stand for something, don't seem to be willing to fight it. I don't know what the reason is. I won't even hazard a guess as to why we saw the view of Nazism as evil as it was and failed to see the scourge of extremist Islamic fundamentalism. I equate them with the same thing. I view them as the same thing. I don't buy into this mantra that the president says that, oh, Iran's just a little country. I dare say they're a greater threat because they eventually will have, or do have, and have not used it, nuclear and chemical weapons. In 1944, after 3 years of war by the United States and more by our allies, a subjugated France, England that was barely hanging on, and other nations, began the final onslaught against Nazism. They had stockpiled huge supplies of men and material because the Germans had the habit of destroying towns as they retreated from them, and they knew that anything that they didn't bring with them across that channel, they weren't going to find. It had to be fought basically by carrying by hand weapons, armaments, and other material across that English channel. And so on June 6th, they manned up an enormous flotilla and started heading across the channel. The fact that some of these beaches didn't know that the Americans were coming across is startling to me in an age where we have radar and satellite photographs. They had no idea they were going to hit when they did. Now, there's intelligence reports, and they knew the Americans were coming. They had built up their shores with defenses in anticipation of the landing. Omaha Beach got the worst of it. They walked into a buzzsaw. If you were on Omaha Beach, I know you've seen the pictures, but you can't imagine what it must have been like. I can't imagine. I can only go by my knowledge of the weapons and armaments of the period. These guys walked into literally a buzzsaw. They were riding in these little boats. It's absolutely prehistoric compared to today's technology. And then basically the boat hit the shore and the door opened and you ran out. That's literally how you hit the beaches. And as soon as that door opened, if there was guys on the beach, as they were in Omaha waiting for him, every gun on that beach opened up with everything it had at the entrance of those little craft. They literally walked into a hurricane of deadly armaments to fight Nazism. And they knew, unless we win here, unless we do this, Nazism will spread. And we've got to do this and get it over as quickly as we can so that we can all go home to our families. This was on the minds of these men. And I say men only in the loosest sense of the word. Most of them were under 21. Most of them were kids. They picked up whatever they had. They joined the military. And they knew what Nazism was, the evil of it. And they willingly walked into that buzzsaw in order to stand for something. They eventually breached the beach. Untold casualties. Most of the guys in the first wave at Omaha never even made it to shore. That's how bad it was. They moved up the beach and eventually went on to defeat communism under the leadership of George Patton, for the most part. Omaha Beach and the D-Day landing were almost an abysmal failure. Several times, the United States and the Allies almost lost that war. It was a lot closer than we have been led to believe in history books. The Germans, a small nation like Iran, fighting on two fronts against an overwhelming Russian horde, managed to put up a defense that withstood the entire might of the world. This is what they did that day. On my Facebook page, I've posted some rare color photography, and I tweeted it out. You can go to my Twitter line and scroll down, and you'll see all the photographs, color photographs, of these boys and the sacrifices they made. And not just the sacrifice of dead people on the beach. The sacrifice of their emotions, of the toll it took, both emotionally and physically, on the men of that period. I dare say that the population of America today is not willing to do this. We have a great deal of dissension in our population about whether the wars in Iraq, whether the invasion of Afghanistan were necessary. And I don't want to debate it today. Today is not a day for that. Today is a remembrance of not just D-Day, but of the people we were in 1944. The photographs I put were not random photographs. They were photographs of the men on D-Day in color. And I did it for a reason, to bring it to you face so that you would feel it more. Because we don't feel the black and white photos. They look distant. When you see the color photos, you realize this happened. This was real. These people were just like us. The problem, what I don't understand, is why were they able to do something and we aren't? I saw a picture, one of them, of an injured soldier who was thankful that he was alive after the initial day. This was on the landing areas, the Calais and beach fronts, and a priest was kneeling down helping the boy pray, because they're boys, really. And he was face down. Obviously, he'd been injured. He was in bandages. And the priest, he wasn't giving last rites, despite what some people have said. He was just helping the boy pray. Today, our military is arguing that chaplains should be non-Christian or non-denominational. This is the difference between then and now. Guys on the beach, grubby, covered in mud, blood, who had just pushed their way up out of the ocean, literally, were having a little breakfast of what they could get. They weren't MREs, nutritionally prepared. They weren't watching their weight with carbohydrates. Guy had a donut and a bagel together with cream cheese and a couple of tin pans. And he was thankful for it. It was probably the best breakfast he ever had. And I don't want to say people don't suffer as much anymore, but they don't experience that level of hardship. You have to understand, in 1944, these are the sons and daughters of people who lived through the Great Depression. To them, this was one more obstacle in life that needed to be overcome. And I have often said that greatness is a result of overcoming obstacles. There can be no greatness without obstacles. And today, there seems to be less and fewer obstacles put in front of today's youth. They're provided free college educations. They're provided cars, clothing, food, money. Today's kids, by and large, live like kings. Certainly compared to my generation, and I'm certain compared to their generation of the 1944 D-Day bunch. I've always felt that the worst thing we could have done to this country was take away the draft. Now, I'm morally opposed to draft. I don't believe in telling people that they must fight or that they should. But I understand that there was something lost with that. A certain sense of self-worth, a certain sense of discipline, a certain sense of moral high ground that is gone today. I'm not saying every kid today is worthless and weak. No, there are many young men who have joined the military. But it's becoming harder and harder to find good people for the military. And I dare say there are many men in the military that really shouldn't be in the uniform. I'll give you an example, the Fort Hood shooter or Private Bergdahl. There are still men that earn the Medal of Honor. There are still men that die in combat. There are still men that are willing to sacrifice everything for their country and the things that they believe in. But those men are becoming fewer and fewer. I just wake up and I look around and I don't see our society as strong a society as it was in 44. As willing to do the right thing. They didn't question whether we needed to fight Nazism. They questioned on how many we're going to kill and which place we're going to land at. And when they finally did get into Nazi Germany, as I suspect when we finally get into Iran someday, if we ever do, they found untold horrors, such as the Jewish concentration camp, such as the way people were living in Germany, that they all said, why didn't we do this sooner? Why didn't we make the effort to get in here faster? And then at the end, we put the men on trial in Nuremberg, and we said to the world, this will never happen again. We cannot allow our fellow man to be as vicious, brutal, prejudiced, murderous, evil as they were under the Nazi regime. What are we doing now in the Middle East? We're doing exactly what we said we would not do at Nuremberg. We stand by while gays and women are hung, stoned, and thrown acid on, And then we point at Republicans and say we're conducting a war on women because we won't provide free birth control pills. I'm going to go over, Ophelia. This is where we are at today as a society. We stand there and turn murderous thugs and cutthroats back over to their side when we haven't finished fighting the war. What is it going to take before the world wakes up and recognizes Islamic fundamentalism for what it is? An anti-Semitic, misogynist culture that seeks to destroy any sort of freedom, independence, or self-worth. If you think the Nazis were bad, Islamic fundamentalism is 10 times as worse. Because the Nazis didn't prey on their own. And the Muslims, the Islamic fundamentalists that are running those places do. And let me leave you with this thought. These are words from General Patton. For those of you who have ever seen the movie Patton, you know what I'm about to say the words are. It's a paragraph that he quoted. And let me put this in context for you. General Patton, at the end of his life, the end of the war, his life ended shortly thereafter. He was a bit introspective about the victory in Europe and about the defeat of Nazism. The rest of the world said this will never happen again. The wars are over. We have the atomic weapon. We know now the evils that men can do when government runs roughshod over freedoms. But Patton was a bit more introspective. He looked at all the people cheering and all the people weeping and praying that the war was over, and all the people going back to their homes and their farms and their families. But he said something which has hit home with me about what we were doing on June 6th, 1944. And I'm going to read his words exactly. For over 1,000 years, Roman conquerors returned from the wars enjoyed the honor of triumph, a tumultuous parade. In the procession came trumpeters, musicians, and strange animals from conquered territories, together with carts laden with treasure and captured armaments. The conquerors rode in a triumphal chariot, the dazed prisoners walking in chains before them. Sometimes his children, robed in white, stood with him in the chariot or rode the trace horses. A slave stood behind the conqueror, holding a golden crown and whispering in his ear a warning that all glory is fleeting. Have a good end, folks. I hope we do. We've come to the end of the show. We'll be back Monday. But I want you to take this weekend to try and remember why we were over there on 44. Don't just remember the dead. Don't just remember the veterans and the wounded soldier and all the casualties. That's important. What's most important that we remember about D-Day is why we were there, what we were fighting for, and the promise that we made to the rest of the world. We promised the world this would never happen again. Take care, folks.